Hi, Michaela.
Hi, Steve.
Well, today we're going to AMA, Ask Michaela Anything. And here I will ask you questions that have been sent in by the viewers and listeners.
Okay.
And the first question is as follows. What would you say to women, specifically, who are seeking relationships but struggling to feel hopeful about meeting someone slightly later on in life? Late 30s, early 40s. How can we cultivate feelings of hopefulness and possibility within a culture that often suggests it should have happened by 28? There can be a great feeling of grief involved in seeing people around you meeting partners relatively easily, not necessarily doing any more than you to meet people. And sometimes it can feel quite shameful to openly say that it feels really hard to remain unpartnered, if that's what you so want. It almost feels unfeminist.
Yeah, I think that's a question that I've heard a lot recently because it seems quite hard these days to actually find someone with whom you have a deep connection, the way these things go now, meaning online or, on apps. And, when the question is saying, relatively late in life, late 30s to 40s, we could, of course, expand that because there's, lots of women also looking for partners or a new partnership after a divorce, or even, way later than that in the 40s and 50s, and even sometimes beyond that. And I think, one of the words that kind of stuck with me in the question is the feeling of being hopeful. And I think the important thing to know and the important thing to cultivate there before we talk about how can you go at it and things like that is that it is possible at absolutely any age to find someone that you can connect with deeply and have a relationship with. As a matter of fact, maybe a week ago or so, I listened to an interview. A friend of mine interviewed the author Isabel Allende for her book club. She has the Dallas Literary Society, and it's an amazing interview because Isabel Allende, of course, has sold over 70 million copies of her books. She's an unbelievably prolific writer. I think she wrote 29 books, and she's 82. And in that interview, she was asked about her first marriage, and then now she is married again. And she was also asked about her sex life in her 80s, which was just such an incredible conversation. And so she divorced when she was 74, I believe, or something around that, and then met someone new 2 years later. And then she didn't want to get married. It's a very funny story. But then eventually she did get married, and she's been married to this new man ever since. So I think that's a perfect example of, never give up on love and never give up on the idea of actually meeting someone when the time is right. So as far as cultivating hopelessness just because other people have found their partner already doesn't mean that you won't find yours. And it doesn't mean that it's hopeless or you're on the shelf in your 30s or early 40s. We could make an argument for you perhaps being formed enough that you actually know what you want and that you can make good decisions in finding a partner and being with a partner, which, of course, as we mature, we have more requirements, which makes it a bit harder, but also we have more distinctions, which makes it a bit better in picking the right person. So I would definitely say it is possible. I've met women up in their 70s who have new partners. So I should definitely think in your late 30s and early 40s, it's not a problem finding someone. But there's one thing in this question that I just wanted to point to where you were saying, you as the questioner, that it almost feels unfeminist to want a partner. And I think there's a little bit of something to explore because if there is this kind of a tension between really wanting to be in a partnership and wanting to be in love and wanting to have that part of life, but then on the other end, feeling like maybe that is a diminishment of one's sovereignty or a diminishment of having made strides in life as an independent, successful woman, that gap between the desire or the heart's yearning and, let's say, the more cognitive ideological piece can cause something of a cognitive dissonance in anyone you meet or in the way you present yourself on a dating app or in person or on a blind date. And so I think the important piece here, as far as what can you do aside from cultivating hopefulness, is that you work with aligning yourself towards what you really truly want, and that you dissolve and resolve any cognitive dissonance between what your heart yearns for, what your body desires, that feeling of wanting a person. In your case, you said you're a woman wanting a man, but this is true for anyone, wanting a person that is your person, that you feel close with and open to and intimate with. That there's nothing wrong with that. That has nothing to do with feminism. You can be a feminist, meaning someone who wants to contribute equally to society and have, choices around your life and your job and the way you express in the world. And your relationship can be part of those choices. And if you have cognitive dissonance there, if you somehow think you're selling out if you want a partner, or you somehow think you're selling out if you want to be in a partnership where there's a give and a take that's not maybe equal in all ways, then that's where I would start, is dissolving and resolving that and aligning that. And then from that place, you'll be able to present what it is that you truly want in a partnership to someone else, because anyone you meet will be able to feel that dissonance. And when that dissonance is felt, it can be felt as you're not really that interested in them, or you're not really interested in going deep into a relationship, or you're not that committed, or you have things that you want more than the relationship. And that, of course, for somebody who actually wants a relationship is definitely off-putting. So and then, of course, on top of that, there is the criteria of whom do you want, and whom do you want to attract, and also who are you, and is who you are what a person that you would want. So that's then the next step. But I think the dissonance is the first thing to work with, and the clarity on what kind of relationship and with whom.
To follow up on that issue of being unfeminist, the questioner seems to be implying, from my reading at least, that the yearning for relationship is somehow unfeminist, and therefore there's a sense of shame or embarrassment in admitting that yearning, that one isn't complete without that relationship. It does fly in the face of certain modern narratives which suggest we should be, if you think more about psychology in general, self-help, we should be whole people meeting whole people. Where is the space for yearning and desire, for partnership? And when does that become neediness, or a betrayal of oneself somehow, as this questioner seems to feel it is, sort of unfeminist, a betrayal of herself and presumably her ideal of feminism? Where does that yearning become a neediness? And what about this idea of meeting two whole people to whole people?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there's a lot in there as far as want and need, right, and these kind of things. Because when we look at the yearning, right, that kind of a feeling of that deep knowing and that deep yearning from the heart and from the body for someone with whom you can really deeply connect and merge and be intimate and all of that, that of course comes in a whole range from let's say if we go with the whole person to whole person, from one whole person wanting to potentiate with another whole person into something that's bigger than the two of them, and then all the way to let's say fairly extreme codependence, right? So that's like one range we can look at. And then we can look at the whole idea that you shouldn't need anyone, and that wanting to combine your life or combine your body or combine your heart or your soul with someone else then is somehow betraying the sisterhood or betraying independence, right? So there's two different things. And I think the first thing to look at is that, yes, of course, you shouldn't need anyone. You should want someone. And what I mean with need versus want is, if you are not capable of supplying for yourself, you're going to have to compromise and sell out in a certain way. So let's just say, like a very simple example that we often hear about in workshops is, if you don't know how to provide, let's say, sensual as well as erotic pleasure to yourself, and you need someone else to fulfill that for you, you are more likely to pick somebody or pick a situation in which you might have to compromise yourself to get that. And you might also harangue or harass or demand from a partner things without actually feeling them, because you commodify them. So there's one extreme example, right? So in an ideal world, you know who you are, you know what you're about, and then but just because you know who you are and you know what you're about does not mean that you don't want someone to share your life with, that you don't want somebody to be intimate with, that you don't want to be in love and do things with a partner and build a life and have a family and, you know, whatever people want. And that want or that desire, let's call it desire or yearning, is, I think, natural and normal and built in from, you know, from the first moments of mankind. And it's not only a biological urge, but it's a matter of thriving and not just surviving. You know, it's a matter of doing something with your life that has a meaning and a purpose, and the heart and love and all of those things are an intricate part of who we are. So when we say we don't need it, doesn't mean we don't want it. And I'm making need and want as in needy and yearning, desirous, right? And so the desire and the yearning, I think, is built in, and it's beautiful, and it's quite wonderful if you can find somebody to do that with. But of course, if you're coming from a place of you don't know how to run your life by yourself, you need somebody to pay the bills or give you gifts or compliment you all the time so you feel okay, you need sexual validation so you feel like, you know, your life's worth something, gifts, you know, and you like the drama of the push-pull and all of that. That's in the neediness domain, let's say, and in the trying to fill holes within yourself with a relationship. And of course, some people like that play because there's a bit of, you know, erotic spark there often that comes from the, you know, from the kind of rub or the tension. But that's not the same as bringing your heart and your full ability to another human who also brings theirs, and then creating something way bigger than the two of them, like a family, for instance, or some construct that allows for both people's gifts and their heart to be brought forward. So I think that's really beautiful. And I think when you feel yearning as such, and when you allow yearning to be part of your life, it's a huge creative force, and it's a huge force of love and for good. So I'm going to say that. But then, of course, on the way there, on the way to whole person, we're never completely whole, but at least somewhat examined. Right? You can get onto these kind of sidearms of different dogmas or different considerations that are essentially a coping mechanism, societally or personally, for something not quite working. And so sometimes you have this with men who've had some really bad experiences with women who decide they're gonna go, you know, and just meditate and take care of themselves and sharpen their own skills. You have it with women who often then call that feminism, be it as it may, right? Different people have different definitions of feminism. But it's like, I don't need a man, I can do for myself. And that's healthy. till you're lonely and sad and do weird things on the internet or buy too much shoes, because you're not accepting your yearning, or you're not accepting what your body wants. So you can get sucked into these kind of dogmatic or ideological sidearms where you kind of spin your wheels believing something, and then you meet other people who also believe the same thing. And there might be something really true to the belief, but there's also probably something that can be looked at or worked with. So those are my two things about that. I don't know if, if there's anything else I should add, or if you have something to add.
Like you say, people define feminism in so many different ways, but I think what's underneath that is a sense of, am I betraying myself and whatever my ideal is by opening myself to another? Perhaps it's the concern of somebody who has had bad experiences, or it might be the concern of somebody who's thought a little bit more deeply about these things and run into exactly the conundrum that you're describing. To be in relationship is to be invested, is to be exposed, it is to be vulnerable. And in the same way that if you sit in a chair, someone takes the chair out from under you, you'll fall over. If you'd never sat in that chair, it wouldn't have mattered. But does that mean you should never sit in chairs? So there's a sense in which one gives oneself to relationships and how to do that. But this person is more suspicious because apparently everyone around her is finding and meeting people, and she's unable to. And that would lead me to suggest that self-evaluation may be in order. What could she be doing differently? If everybody else is succeeding, assuming, taking her at her word, of course, if everyone else is succeeding and she's failing, then it probably is by process of elimination, to some degree, her problem. So what can she do to address that? And that's a very difficult thing that one ought to perhaps carry out with a therapist. If it's true that everybody else is succeeding and you're failing, then it is you. If it's not true that everyone else is succeeding and that you're failing, but you think it's that way, that's still a you problem. So either way, an adjustment needs to be made there.
Yes.
To either bring your perception up to reality in the second case, or in the first case, to figure out why it is that you're so undateable, and see if there's a reasonable way of remedying that doesn't betray who you fundamentally are. And I think that's also the core of the last bit of the question, which is she doesn't want to be unfeminist. In other words, she doesn't want to portray her core values in pursuing a relationship. And that is a worthwhile consideration. Otherwise, you get into a relationship, but you've abandoned yourself. And that's no good either. So it's a thorny sort of a question.
Yeah, I think you're making an excellent point there as to it's worth examining, are her values different, from the people who are finding the partners. So, of course, if you go something like, I want to find a partner and have a family with, that's a different finding of a partner than I want to find a partner to travel the world with and, preserve world peace. Or it's a different consideration as in, I want a partner, but I don't really want a partner because I want to be extremely self-sufficient. And I want somebody who's also self-sufficient. And when it all works out, sometimes we'll get together. That's a very different partner. So I think one of the first things to look at is what kind of partnership does she want? And then do the other people who already have partners have different criteria? Maybe it's an apple to oranges situation. And her pain and heartache comes from the fact that the people around her who have the partners want other things than she wants, for instance, right? Or it could be that she wants the same things the other people want, they have it, she doesn't. Then that's something that needs to be taken up with a therapist, and in seriousness, as in what is it that's happening. And then within that is, are you aligned, are your values, like you said, aligned with what it is that you yearn for? And then the next step is, can you align what you yearn for with your values so you're congruent to someone you meet right? Which is really, really important. No one is going to want to have a relationship with somebody who is ambivalent or torn or incongruent in what they say they want and how they behave. And that's something to really kind of look into. And by the way, obviously, we've talked about this in other podcasts. This is also true within an existing relationship, that sometimes you have to adjust the alignment and you have to kind of recommit to a purpose of relationship because things have changed and people want different things or suddenly have different values or have reoriented a certain way. So, examining what it is that you want and if the person you're with or the person you want is actually aligned with that is one of those real important aspects of relationship.
Something else that occurs to me about her use of the word unfeminist, which is that many of us have a certain orientation to life, an ideal of some type. It could be a religious ideal. One hears this in the Christian community, for example, or religious communities in general. I want to date, I want to find a partner, but I don't want to do it in an unchristian way. I want to do it in a kind of, holy way or a virtuous way. And there are all kinds of, if you look at religious communities, there's lots of advice about how to date in a kind of, Christian way that doesn't betray your Christian ideal. One thing that's sometimes suggested is that it helps to find somebody who shares your ideal. So if you're a Christian who's committed to that religion, it probably helps to find someone who shares that ideal, especially if you want to raise children together or do other such things that require a kind of compatibility in that regard. Not everyone thinks that way, of course, and plenty of people marry across religious and idealistic lines or ideological lines, and sometimes it works quite well, actually, and sometimes it helps that you have someone to balance that part of you out. But nonetheless, if one is committed to a certain sort of ideal, such as feminism, do you think it's worth leading with that and filtering the people you meet to find someone who agrees with you on those core tenets?
Well, yes and no, right? So it depends once again on what kind of relationship you want, right? So considering that the questioner says all the people around her have relationships already and she doesn't, and she's yearning for it, but it hasn't happened yet. And there's the feeling of wanting to be hopeful. This is, of course, I'm assuming things because we can't ask her live here on the podcast, but I'm assuming she's talking about a fairly committed long-term relationship with someone with whom she can do these things that she yearns for. And so then we have to say, as we have often talked about, right, relationship, meaning long-term, successful, sustainable relationship, is built on sameness, on common values, common goals, common ideas. And so in that case, yes, I would say she would need to find somebody who shares some of her ideas. But I think it's also important to make sure that whatever she says, her, let's say, ideas of feminism are really what is her like guiding North Star, or are these just ideas that she's picked up along the way that are not really that fleshed out when we feel her heart and her body? But if it is very important to her that she's independent, let's say, and has her own money and her own work and her own career and her a say in the relationship that's 50-50, she would need a partner who's absolutely up for that. Absolutely. Otherwise, it's a bloodbath all along, right? So I would definitely say, and this goes into the criteria for a partner and the value of the relationship, that should be defined very strongly. Because one of the things that comes through in that, I don't want to be unfeminist, or am I unfeminist by yearning for a partner, that's what I mean is the dissonance, right? Because maybe she just thinks that's unfeminist, but she could actually feel that she's coming as a whole person to another whole person, and that's not really an issue. And then she's with somebody who appreciates that she's a whole person with a life and a job and a career and a mind of her own, right? So that's good. But yes, it's definitely important that she shares values with someone. But then the no, of course, is that sometimes when you kind of when you're not completely clear on your values and your ideologies or religions or things like that, you can attract somebody who seems like the right kind of fit, but then as you kind of deepen and grow as a human, it turns out that they're actually holding you back, or that they're actually that they're compromising you, right? And that's, I think, what I hear in that question is, am I compromising myself by wanting a partner and also wanting my own life or my own independence or my sovereignty or whatever she means by feminist, right? We don't know that because there is so many definitions by so many people. And that brings us back to the very beginning of what we talked about, which is you do want to know who you are, and you do want to know your core values and your worth and what you're bringing, so that you don't accidentally sell yourself out for the sake of being loved, or for the sake of having sex, or for the sake of security, or for the sake of societal standing. Lots of people do it. And so it could be that some of the people that she sees partnered up have done that. It could also be that they have different values, or it could be that they're just less discerning and they're just going in and making the best out of what they want to do, which sometimes is the way to go, right? I mean, I know people who got married in their 20s who say now, looking back, 20, 30 years later, wow, we didn't know anything, but we loved each other and we went into this thing together and we had children and we worked it out and it's really good. And they go through these iterations of being parents and then empty nesters and, they do different things happen in the relationship, but the relationship is really beautiful and strong and worthwhile and loving. And you work the stuff out within the relationship. Sometimes that's, I don't want to say easier, but sometimes that's something that people in long-term relationship report. But then also there's a lot of people who, they get married in their 20s and by the mid 30s, 2 kids later, they're getting divorced because they never really actually lined up, or they never really actually examined what they were about. So I think, to round this out, there's always hope. There's always the option to be with someone who loves you and whom you love, but clarity and self-knowledge and also an honest assessment of gifts and shortcoming is key in any relationship at any given moment in time. So I would highly recommend for anyone who kind of struggles with that is to really, do a few steps along the lines of self-assessment and goal setting and value setting and value alignment, so that you come to dating and relationship from a different place.
And our relationship toolkit is one possible resource to begin with. It's a set of questions, lots of questions that you've compiled over your many tens of thousands of client hours doing couples therapy of various types, that can be used as a sort of exploration for a couple, but it can also be used as someone who wants to clarify their own thinking about relationship and to go through those questions and ask those kinds of questions and get clear about it. Because often these sorts of conundra come from a lack of clarity, either about one's ideal or about the reality that one feels is in conflict with one's ideal. So I think the relationship toolkit is one particularly useful relationship clarification resource, whether that's in the context of an existing partnership or indeed a single.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the questions I've ever used and asked in my private practice, sorted by certain themes, and you can do like long form writing about it. You can take it to your therapist. You can speak about it with a friend or your partner as a means of clarifying some of those ideological and value-based, questions. So definitely.
Well, very interesting, Michaela. Thank you for considering that. And we'll continue next time with some more AMA, Ask Michaela Anything. Michaela Boehm, thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Steve.